Hello everyone, I am Daily Train My Brain, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The hidden room in the baker's basement wasn't on any floor plan. It wasn't supposed to exist, but as I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the ajar door I'd just discovered, I knew my life was about to change forever. I'd been babysitting for the Bakers for months now. Their daughter Lily was a sweet kid, easy to look after. The house was in one of those affluent neighborhoods where the lawns are always perfect, and the cars in the driveways cost more than my college tuition. I never thought much about the family beyond our brief interactions. Mr. Baker was always polite, if a bit distant. Mrs. Baker was warm and chatty. They seemed normal, boring even. But normal people don't have hidden rooms filled with surveillance photos and cryptic documents. It started as a typical Thursday night. I arrived at 7 p.m. just as Mr. Baker was heading out. He gave me the usual instructions. Bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the kitchen, call if I needed anything. I nodded along, already thinking about the history paper I'd work on once Lily was asleep. The evening went smoothly. Lily and I played board games, then I tucked her in and read her a story. By 9 p.m., the house was quiet. I settled on the couch with my laptop, ready to dive into my essay on the French Revolution. That's when I heard it, a faint noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or the heating system kicking in, but it persisted, a soft mechanical whir that seemed out of place. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Leaving my laptop on the couch, I made my way to the basement door. The noise grew louder as I descended the stairs, my hand trailing along the cool concrete wall. The basement was finished, with plush carpeting and recessed lighting. A large TV dominated one wall, surrounded by leather couches. A pool table stood in the corner. Everything screamed wealth and comfort. But the noise wasn't coming from any of that. It was emanating from behind a bookshelf tucked in the far corner. As I approached, I noticed something odd, a thin line of light peeking out from behind the shelf. My heart rate picked up. I ran my fingers along the edge of the bookcase, feeling for anything unusual. There, a small indentation. I pressed it, and the bookshelf swung open with a soft click. Behind it was a door, slightly ajar. The whirring noise was clear now, coming from within. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle. This was wrong. I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be snooping. But my curiosity overwhelmed my better judgment. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The walls were lined with computer monitors, each displaying a different feed. I recognized some of the locations, the baker's front yard, their kitchen, even Lily's bedroom. Others showed places I didn't know, office buildings, parking lots, the interiors of what looked like other homes. In the center of the room stood a desk, its surface covered in papers and photographs. A sleek laptop sat open, lines of code scrolling across its screen. This was the source of the whirring, the fan working overtime. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the desk. The photos were a mix of surveillance shots and more personal images. I recognized Mr. Baker in many of them, but he looked different, harder. In some, he was speaking with men in suits. In others, he was handling what looked like large sums of cash. The documents were even more disturbing. Financial records, transcripts of phone conversations, detailed schedules of people's daily routines. None of it made sense, but the pit in my stomach told me it was nothing good. I picked up one of the photos, my hands shaking. It showed Mr. Baker shaking hands with a man whose face I'd seen on the news. A businessman who'd been arrested last year for fraud and money laundering. The sound of a car door slamming made me jump. I dropped the photo, my heart leaping into my throat. Footsteps on the front porch, keys jingling in the lock. They were home early. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of here, had to pretend I'd never seen any of this. I rushed out of the hidden room, pulling the door shut behind me. The bookshelf swung back into place with a soft thud. I raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I could hear voices now, Mr. and Mrs. Baker in the foyer. I burst into the living room, diving for the couch where I'd left my laptop. The front door opened just as I settled into position, my computer on my lap, trying to look as if I'd been there all along. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. "Oh, hello there," Mrs. Baker's voice rang out, cheerful as ever. "How was Lily?" I looked up, forcing a smile. "She was great," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Went to bed without any fuss." Mr. Baker nodded, hanging up his coat. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something there, a flicker of suspicion, perhaps. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Thanks for staying late," he said. "We got caught up at the charity event." I nodded, gathering my things. Every movement felt exaggerated, as if my body was screaming out my guilt. "No problem at all," I managed. "I got some studying done." As I made my way to the door, Mrs. Baker handed me my payment, a crisp $100 bill. "See you next week?" she asked. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Could I come back here, knowing what I knew? But refusing would look suspicious. "Of course," I said, plastering on another smile. "Have a good night." The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, and I gulped it down gratefully. My car was parked at the curb, and I forced myself to walk to it at a normal pace. "Don't run," I told myself. "Act natural." Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had seen. Who were the Bakers? Really? What was Mr. Baker involved in? I started the engine, desperate to put distance between myself and that house. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Mr. Baker stood in the doorway, watching me leave. The porch light cast shadows across his face, making him look sinister and unfamiliar. I drove home on autopilot, my thoughts a chaotic whirl. What was I supposed to do with this information? Go to the police? But with what evidence? I had nothing but my word, and who would believe a college student babysitter over a respected businessman? When I got home, I double-checked all the locks on my apartment door. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest, and tried to think rationally. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Mr. Baker was some kind of private investigator, and this was all for a case. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The cash, the shady meetings, the extensive surveillance, it all pointed to something illegal. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as my mind conjured up increasingly terrifying scenarios. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't go back to that house. I'd call Mrs. Baker and make up some excuse about my class schedule changing. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than walking back into what felt like a lion's den. But as I reached for my phone, it buzzed with an incoming text. My blood ran cold as I read the message from an unknown number. "Enjoyed your little exploration last night? Let's talk. Come to the house at 2 p.m. Come alone, or things will get unpleasant for you and your family." My hands shook as I dropped the phone. They knew. Somehow, they knew I'd been in that room. Had there been a hidden camera I hadn't noticed? Or had I left some trace of my presence? I thought about running, about packing a bag and just driving until I couldn't anymore. But the threat hung heavy in my mind. Your family. They knew who I was, who my loved ones were. I glanced at the clock. 10 a.m. 4 hours until I had to face whatever was waiting for me at the Baker's house. 4 hours to figure out how I was going to get out of this mess alive. As I sat there, my mind racing through possibilities, one thing became crystal clear. My life as I knew it was over, whatever happened at 2 p.m. I'd be stepping into a world I never asked to be part of, a world of secrets and dangers. I couldn't begin to comprehend the sunny Thursday evening when I'd walked into the Baker's house. Blissfully unaware felt like a lifetimer. Now I was strapped in a nightmare of my own curiosities, making with no clear way out. I looked out my window at the quiet street below, watching as my neighbors went about their normal lives, envied them their ignorance, because I knew that in 4 short hours I'd be facing the consequences of uncovering a truth that was never meant to be found, and I had no idea if I'd survive the encounter. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. I never expected my routine night patrol to turn into a fight for survival, but as I crouched behind a fallen oak, my hand trembling on my radio, I realized this night would change everything. My name's Jack, and I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Park for the better part of a decade. I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Turns out I didn't know them nearly as well, as I thought. It was a cool autumn night, the kind where your breath fogs in front of you and the crunch of leaves underfoot seems to echo for miles. I'd been one deadly wed found several mutilated animal carcasses in the past week, clear signs of poaching. But catching poachers in the act, that was like finding a needle in a haystack. I'd been walking my usual route for about an hour when I first heard it, a low murmur of voices barely audible over the ambient sounds of the forest. I froze, straining my ears there. It was again, definitely human voices, and definitely not lost hikers at this hour. My heart rate picked up as I slowly moved towards the sound, keeping low and using the underbrush for cover. As I got closer, I could make out more details, multiple male voices speaking in hushed, but excited to nest the metallic click of what could only be firearms being handled. I crept to the edge of a small clearing, and that's when I saw them 5 men dressed in kama gathered around the carcass of what looked like a young elk. High-powered rifles leaned against nearby trees, and I could see the glint of hunting knives in the moonlight. My stomach churned. This wasn't just opportunistic poaching. This was an organized operation. I reached for my radio intending to call for backup, but he stated we were understaffed, as it was, and the nearest other ranger was at least an hour away. By the time help arrived, these guys would be long gone. I had to do something. Now, taking a deep breath, I stepped into the clearing, my hand on my sidearm. Gentlemen, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm going to have to ask you to put down your weapons and put your hands where I can see them for a moment. Everything was still. Then all hell broke loose. 2 of the men immediately grabbed for their rifles. Another lunged for meat, knife glinting in his hand. I managed to sidestep him, drawing my gun in one fluid motion. Stop right there, I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. Zed, drop your weapons. The man with the knife hesitated, but the others were undeterred. None of them. Burly guy with a thick beard leveled his rifle at me. You're outnumbered, Ranger, he growled. I walk away now, and we forget this ever happened. I stood my ground, my gun trained on him, acutely aware of how outmatched I was. Can't do that. I said, you boys are coming with me. The bearded Mancy's narrowed. Have it your way, he said, and fired. The shot went wide, splintering the trunk of a tree just in chest from my head. I dove for cover behind a large boulder, my heart pounding in my ears. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I could heart them spreading out trying to flank me. I risked a glance around the edge of the boulder and barely pulled back in time as another shot ricocheted off the rock face. Come on out, Ranger, one of them called. We just want to talk. Yeah, right. I knew full well that if I showed myself, I was as good as dead. The seamen had too much to lose to leave any witnesses. I fumbled for my radio, keeping my gun trained on the direction of their voices. This is Ranger Collins, I whispered urgently. In need immediate backup at Sector 7. Armed poachers, shots fired. I repeat, shots fired. Static was my only reply. Either we were too deep in the woods for a signal or they were jamming communications somehow. Either way, I was on my own at Wiggs Nap to my left, and I whirled, firing off a warning shot. Stay back. They shouted, next one want miss. Laughter echoed through the tree. Shibig words for a man hiding behind a rock. On of them taunted. I gritted my teeth, trying to think. I couldn't stay here for, but making a run for it would be suicide. I needed a plan. My eyes fell on the elk carcass, stilling in the middle of the clearing. An idea began to form. It was risky, but it might be my only chance. Keeping low, I shrugged off my jacket and stuffed it with leaves and underbrush. It wasn't much, but in the dark it might pass for a human form, at least long enough to serve as a distraction. Right, I called out, trying to sound defeated. In coming out, don't shoot. I heard them shuffling, readying their weapons slowly. I raised my makeshift dummy above the boulder with one hand while I stayed hidden hands where we can see the mud. Of them barked. I lifted the dummy higher, then suddenly flung it to the side as I'd hoped they took the bait. Multiple shots rang out, shredding my jacket. In that moment of confusion, I sprang into action. I sprinted for the elk carcass, diving behind it. Just as they realized their mistake, bullets whizzed overhead. The bulk of the animal better covered than the boulder had now for phase 2 of my desperate plan. They took aim at the elk's bloated stomach and fired. The carcass burst upon releasing. Astent softwoolet made my eyes water. I heard retching and cursing from the poachers using the distraction. I made a break for the tree line. I crashed through the underbrush branches, whipping at my face as I ran. I could hear them behind me, but the head start and the nauseating smell had given me an advantage. I ran like I'd never run before, zigging and zagging through trees. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew these woods, but sodded they, my only hope was to make it back to me Jeep before they caught up after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I burst out of the tree line onto the narrow dirt road where I had parked my Jeeps. Sat there, a beautiful sight in the moonlight. Just as I reached for the door handle, a shot rang out. Pain exploded in my left arm and I stumbled, crying out. I turned to see the bearded man emerging from the woods, his rifle trained on me. Of the liner ranger, he had a cruel smile on his face. I leaned against the Jeep, my injured arm hanging uselessly at my side. Blood soaked my sleeve. and the pain was making it hard to think straight, but I wasn't done yet. Is Ed fighting to keep my voice steady? It's the end of the line, for you, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then his eyes widened as she heard what I'd been praying for, the distant wail of sirens in that moment of distraction. I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, both of us fighting for control of the rifle despite the pain. In my arm, adrenaline gave mess strength. I managed to wrench the gun from his grasp and bring the butt of it down hard on his head. He went limp beneath me. I staggered to my feet, the rifle clutched in my good hand. Just as several patrol cars came into view, their lights painting the trees in red and blue. The cavalry had finally arrived. The next few hours passed in a blur. The other poachers were rounded up. My arm was patched up, and I gave statement after statement by the time the sun rose. Painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was a lover as I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. My boss approached. He looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. "You did good, Jack," he said, clapping me on my uninjured shoulder. "Those guys were part of airing we've been trying to bust for months. You just broke the case wide open." He nodded, too exhausted to feel much, beyond relief that I was still alive. "Get some rest," that continued, "and when you're back on your feet, well, let's just say there might be a promotion in your future." As she walked away, I gazed out at the forest. The same trees that had been a battlefield just hours ago now looked peaceful in the morning light. I knew I'd never look at these woods the same way again. But I also knew that I'd be back. This forest was my home, and I'd nearly died protecting it. If anything, this ordeal had only strengthened my resolve. There would be other poachers, other threats, and I'd be her standing guard. Because that's what Rangers do, protect what can't protect itself, no matter the cost. I climbed into the ambulance, wincing as the movement jostled my injured arm as we pulled away. I took one last look at these of green stretching out behind. See, I'd be back. These woods hadn't seen the last of Ranger Jack Collins, not by a long shot the moment. I clasped Ed the vintage necklace around my neck. I had no idea I was putting a target on my back. It was beautiful, delicate, and seemed harmless, but some things are too good to be true, and this piece of jewelry was about to turn my life into a living nightmare. My name is Sarah, and until a week ago I was just another face in the crowd. At 28-year-old graphic designer with a small art apartment in the city, a cat named Malone, and a penchant for online shopping. That show, this all started with a late-night scrolling session and a seemingly innocent purchase. I'd been browsing a local buy and sell website looking for unique accessories to spruce up my wardrobe. That's when I was with a stunning Art Deco necklace with an intricate silver pendant, a deep blue stone that seemed to catch the light in the photograph. The seller, Karen, had listed it at a surprisingly reasonable price. Without a second thought, I clicked buy now. Karen and I arranged to meet at a local cafe. The next day she seemed nice enough, mid-30s, friendly smile. Nothing out of the ordinary. We chatted over coffee. As she handed Meth a necklace, "It's been in my family for years," she said, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in her voice's sadness, relief. "I hope you'll treasure it as much as we have." I assured her I would pay for the necklace, and we parted ways as I walked home. I couldn't resist putting it on the weight of it against my collarbone. It felt right, like it belonged there that night. I wore it to a friend's birthday dinner. The compliments came rolling in, and I basked in the attention. It wasn't until I was walking home, the streets quiet and dark, that I first felt it, the sensation of being watched. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder, nothing but shadows and streetlights. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. By the time I reached my apartment building, I was almost running. I double-checked the locked locks that night before going to bed. Mila curled up at my feet. I chalked it up to too much wine and an overactive imagination. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I got ready for work, absent-mindedly putting on the necklace again. It really did go with everything. It was lunchtime when things started to get weird. I was at my desk scrolling through my phone when a text from an unknown number popped up. "Nice necklace, it suits you." I froze my sandwich halfway to my mouth. I looked around the office, but everyone was engrossed in their own work with shaking fingers. They typed back, "Who is this?" Their reply came almost instantly, "A friend," and for now, I put my phone down, my appetite gone. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept touching the necklace and wondering if I should take it off. But that was crazy, right? It was just a necklace. I was being paranoid. I was about to go to bed when I heard it, a soft scratching at my front door. Melosers perked up and hella tout a low grow hello. I called out, my voice sounding small in the quiet apartment. No answer, but the scratching continued. I approached the door, on tip to heart pounding the peepholes out an empty hallway. I don't know what Possessed metadoit, but I opened the door. There on the whelm mat was a single red rose and a note that belonged to me first. He'll be coming for it, Islam. Med the door shut, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my back against the wood. Milo came over, butting his head against my hand. He scratched his ears absently, my mind racing. What had Karen got in mind? I barely slept that night. Jumping at every sound by morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting and needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. I called Karen, but the number was disconnected. Frustrated, I decided to go to the cafe, where hoping the staff might remember her or have some information. As I approached the cafe, is aware Karen sitting at an outside table, looking nervous. Relief flooded through me. Finally summons, "Where's Karen?" I called out, quickening my pace. She looked up, here, eyes widening in fear. Before I could reach her, a man appeared seemingly out of nowhere, grabbing her arm. Roughly. Inside now would growled loud enough for me to heart. They disappeared into the cafe just as I reached the table. I burst through the door after them, but they were gone. The barista looked at me quizzically. The couple that just came in. I panted, "Where did they go?" He shrugged. "Didn't see anyone come in, miss." But I knew what. Eyes all shaken, I left the cafe, my hand instinctively going to the necklace. What had I gotten myself into over the next few days? The incident escalated. More texts from unknown numbers, unmarked packages left at my door containing old photographs of the necklace on different women, a man in a dark coat following me home from work. I was a nervous wreck. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I was being stalked because of a necklace I bought online? They'd laugh me out of the station. They tried to distract myself with work, but I couldn't focus. My colleagues noticed, asking if I was okay. I brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about not sleeping well. It was Friday night when everything came to a head. I was working late, trying to catch up on projects. I had fallen behind. On the office was empty. The only sound, the hum of my computer and the ticking of the wall clock. A noise in the hallway made me jump. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching my office. My heart raced as I watched the door handle turn slowly. The doors swung open, revealing a man I'd never seen before, tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes that immediately fixed on the necklace at my throat. At last, the said, his voice is smooth but menacing. "I've been looking for that for a very long time." He stood up, putting the desk between us. "Who are you? What do you want?" The smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Robert, and I want what's mine." He took a step forward, and I edged toward the window. "The necklace isn't yours. I bought it fair and square." Robert laughed, a chilling sound. "Oh, my dear, nothing about this has been fair. That necklace has a long and bloody history. It's brought nothing but misfortune to its wearers, and now it's time for her to come home." As she spoke, he reached into his jacket. My blood ran cold as she pulled out a Ganawa, said calmly, "I'm going to need you to hand that over." Slowly my mind raced. The necklaces suddenly felt the Abbey like it was choking me. With trembling fingers I reached for the clasp. Just then the office door burst open again. Karen rushed in, breathless. "Sarah, don't." Robert whirled his gun off, trained on Karen. "You has gnarled. You should have known you'd show up." Karen's ease darted between Robert and me. "Sarah, listen to me. The necklace is more than just jewelry. It's a key to something powerful and dangerous. That's why he wants it." Robert's face contorted with ragish. Up he shouted, his composure cracking in that moment of distraction. I acted on instinct. I grabbed the heavy paper weight from my desk and hurled it at Robert. It struck its hank, his sending the gun clattering to the floor. Karen lunged for the weapon while I ran for the door. I could hear them struggling behind me as I raced down the hallway to the stairs. My feet pounded against the steps as I descended, my breath coming in ragged gasp. I burst out of the building into the cool night air, not daring to look back. We ran without direction, just needing to put distance between myself and what I'd left behind after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I found myself in a small park. I collapsed onto a bench, my hand going to the necklace. I wanted nothing more than to rip it off and throw it away, but something stopped me. Karen's words echoed in my mind, a key to something powerful and dangerous. As my breathing slowed, I heard footsteps approaching. I'd run again, but it was Karen who emerged from the shadows, looking disheveled but unharmed. "It's okay," she said, holding up her hands. "She's gone for now." I zagged with relief. "What's going on?" "Karen, what is this thing?" It touched the necklace as she sat down beside me with a heavy sigh. "It's a long story, one that goes back centuries. That necklace, it's not just a piece of jewelry. It's a key to an ancient vault hidden somewhere in this city, a vault that contains artifacts of immense power." I stared at her, trying to process this information, and Robert is part of an organization that's been searching for the key for generations. They'll stop at nothing to get it. I shook my head, overwhelmed. "Why me? Why did you sell it to me?" Karen looked at me here, sad. It thought I could hide it in plain sight. "I'm sorry, Sarah. It never meant for you to get caught up in this." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over us. Finally, I stood up. "So what, Dowd?" Now Karen stood to, a determined look on her face. "Now we find the vault before they do, and we make sure whatever's inside never falls into the wrong hands as we walked out of the park. The necklaces seemed to pulse against my skin. As if lived with possibility, I realized that my life had changed irrevocably. The normal, mundane existence I'd known was gone. In its place was a world of secrets, danger, and untold power. And somehow I was now at the center of it all. All because of a necklace I'd bought. Ton of whim. Life's funny like that. Sometimes one small decision and suddenly you're in the middle of a century-old conflict with the fate of powerful artifacts resting on your shoulders. But as terrifying as it was, a small part of me was exhilarated for the first time in my life. It felt like I was part of something bigger than myself, and so with Karen by my side and a target on my back, I stepped into the night ready to face whatever came. Next, after all, I had a vault to find. The moment is on. Nurse Samantha SL, those veals into her pocket. I knew my quiet night shift had just become a waking nightmare. What I didn't know was that it would be the longest night of my life, and I might not make it to morning my names. Mike and I have been working as a janitor at St. Andrew's Hospital for almost a year now. Night shift isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble, or at least it used to. It was just past 3 a.m. That dead time of night when even the hospital seems to hold its breath. I was making my usual rounds, mop in hand, nodding to the occasional nurse or orderly. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, mixing with the underlyings of sickness that never quite goes away in places like this. I just turned the corner onto the third floor when I saw her nurse Samantha, a big woman with a reputation for being tough as nails. While standing by the supply closet, nothing unusual there except for the way she kept glancing over her shoulder. Her movements jerky and nervous. Curiosity got the better of me. I hung back, pretending to be very interested in a particularly stubborn floor stain from the corner of my eye. I watched as Samantha fumbled with the closed lock, slipped inside, and emerged moments later with her hand suspiciously full. My heart skipped a beat as Izor quickly pocketed several vials of what I was pretty sure weren't a spine. I'd seen enough TV to know what was going on here, but seeing it in real life, that was something else entirely. I must have made a noise, or maybe she just sensed she was being watched. Samantha's head snapped up here, eyes locking with mine. For a moment we just stared at each other, the truth of what I'd witnessed hanging between us like a live wire. Then she smiled and my blood ran cold. Mike, isn't it? She said, her voice honey sweet, but her eyes hard as flint. Just the man I wanted to see. Could you come help me with something? Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I got? This was my job, my livelihood, and who would believe then? I janitor over our respected nurses, so like an idiot, I nodded and followed her into an empty patient room. The moment the door closed behind us, Samantha's demeanor changed. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by a snarl that made her look more animal than human. Listen here, you little rat, she has said, backing me against the wall. You didn't see anything, got it? And if you and think about opening your mouth, I'll make sure you regret it, understand? I nodded frantically, my heart pounding so hard. I was sure she could hear it. As I understand, I didn't see nothing. She studied me, though. Ran moment, then stepped back, smoothing her scrubs. Good. Now get back to work. And Mike, remember, I know where you lived. With that chilling reminder, she left, leaving me alone in the room, shaking like a leaf with the next hour. I went through the motions of my job on autopilot, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. People could get hurt if Samantha was stealing medication, but the thought of what she might do if I talked, I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost ran right into Dror Patel, one of the senior physicians on the night shift desk. Udied me with a hand on my shoulder, his brow furrowing with concern. Are you all right, Mike? You look like you've seen a ghost. I opened my mouth ready to spill everything, but Samantha's threat echoed in my mind instead. I mumbled something about not feeling well and hurried past, and as I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of Samantha watching me from the nurse's station here. Yes, narrowed suspiciously. I quickened my pace, feeling her gaze boring into my back. The rest of the night was a game of cat and mouse every time I thought I was alone. Samantha would appear, reminding me of her presence with a pointed look, or at woo casual brush past me the hallway. By the time 500A rolled around, my nerves were shot. I was emptying trash bins in the staff break room when I heard it. Samantha's voice is low and urgent, coming from just outside the door. I'm telling you, we've got a problem. She was saying, the janitor's on me, we need to take care of it. My blood turned to ice. Take care of it? What did that mean? A male voice responded, too quiet for me to make out the words. Then Samantha again, now I can't wait. It has to be tonight before he has a chance to talk. I looked around frantically, searching for a way out, but the only exit was the door they were standing in front of. I was trapped. The voices moved away, and when I sagged against the wall, my mind reeling. This was no longer about stolen medication. They were talking about silencing me permanently. I had to get out of, or had to tell someone what was going on. But who the police, hospital, security, would anyone believe me? Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and peeked out into the hallway. It was clear now whenever I made my way to the elevator, as casually as I could, fighting the urge to break into a run. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand shot out, stopping them. My heart sank as Samantha Hay stepped in, followed by a burly orderly I'd seen around but never spoken to, going down. Mike, Samantha asked, her tone conversational, but her eyes cold. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The elevator began its descent, the tension in the small spaces. Suffolk, I could barely breathe at these floor. Samantha turned to me, "Oh, Mike, I just remembered, could you help us with something in the basement? Won't take but a minute, it wasn't our quest." The orderly's hand on my shoulder made that clear. As we exited the elevator into the dimly lit basement, I knew with horrifying certainty that if I went with them, I wouldn't be coming back up. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I shoved the orderly ashard as I could, sending him stumbling into Samantha and Iran. I could hear them shouting behind me as it tore through the basement, dodging around storage shelves and equipment. I had no plan or destination in mind beyond the way. I burst through a fire exit, setting off alarms that pierced the pre-dawn quiet. The cool morning air hit me like a slap to the face. As I emerged into the hospital's rear parking lot behind me, I could hear the fire doors open again at them. Samantha's voice rang out. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my feet pounding against the asphalt. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. As I reached the street, a car screeched to a halt in front of me. Nearly running the Patel, hand out of the driver's window, his eyes wide with shock. "Mike, what on earth, please?" I gasped, glancing over my shoulder to see Samantha and the orderly gaining on me. "Help me, they're trying to kill me." Maybe it was the desperation in my voice, or maybe he'd had his own suspicions about Sama. And thought whatever there as in Doc Patel didn't hesitate yet, and he said, unlocking the doors. I dove into the passenger seat just as Samantha reached the car. Doc Patel floored, leaving her cursing in our wake as we whisked away from the hospital. Words poured out of mine, a frantic jumble. I told him everything: the stolen medication, the threats, the conversation I'd overheard. Doc listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he nodded grimly. I've suspected something was going on for a while. Now was said, but I had no proof, until Nawa pulled out his phone, keeping one hand on the wheel. "I'm calling the police and the hospital administrator. This ends." No, as I watched him make the calls, relief washed over me, followed quickly by exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading, leaving me drained. "What happens now?" I asked as she hung up. Doc Patel gave me a reassuring smile. "Now we get you somewhere safe. The police will meet you, and you'll tell them everything you told me. Samantha and her accomplices won't get away with this." As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a glimmer of hope. The night shift from hell was over, but a new day was dawning, a day where the truth would come out and justice would be served. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. Who would have thought that a simple janitor like me would end up bringing down a drug ring? Life sure has a way of surprising you. One thing was for certain: I was never going to look at night shifts the same way again. But hey, at least I had done hello for a story to tell, assuming, of course, that I lived long enough to tell it. The crackling of our campfire was drowned out by the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being cocked. In that moment, I realized our peaceful camping trip had just become a fight for sore. Vevel, my name's Alexander. What started as a weekend getaway with my closest friends turned into the most terrifying experience of our lives. Looking back, I still can't believe we made it out. It was supposed to be a perfect trip. Me, my best friend Tom, his girlfriend Sarah, and our mutual friend Jake had been planning this camping excursion for months. We'd found a secluded spot deep in the national forest, far from the usual tourist trails, the kind of place where you could really disconnect from the world and immerse yourself in nature. We arrived late Friday after noon, the sun already starting to dip behind the trees. The spot was even more beautiful than we'd imagined, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines with a babbling creek nearby. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and settled in for what we thought would be a relaxing evening. As night fell, we sat around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. The stars came out more brilliant than I'd ever seen them away from the city lights. It was exactly the escape we'd been hoping for. Hey, did you guys chart that? Sarah suddenly, her head tilted to one side. Well, fell silent, straining our ears, so at first I didn't hear anything beyond the usual nighttime caress sounds.